that if you have been an entrepreneur for years and years and years, what we call an expert entrepreneur, what is it that you have learned that I can also, teach in a classroom? So if you ask, what is effectuation? And as I said, I'm going to go give you bottom line first. So for the moment, just bear with the word effectuation. What is effectuation? Effectuation is a way to act when the future is not only unknown, because a lot of us know that the future is unknown, but we think somehow because we are smarter and we have all these tools or whatever, we can predict it better. And in some cases, we can indeed predict better, and we get better at prediction through technology as well. But the idea of effectuation is to act when the future is not only unknown, but is unknowable. Because there are certain things, no matter how many instances you gather and create the distributions, it's still completely unexpected things happen. The obvious example today is, if I asked you in, say, September or October of 2019, is the world, was the world more uncertain then, or is the world more uncertain today? And people they scratch their heads and they come on both sides of it, right? So in some ways, you can argue that October 2019 was less uncertain because they were just chugging along. We did not know that COVID was around the corner. And then all of a sudden COVID hits us, right? So you can also interpret that to say that, September, October 2019, the world was fundamentally unknowable because we didn't know this was waiting around the corner. And that's what makes life unknown, right? It's not the fact that unexpected things happen, but in some ways, any amount of work cannot predict the future. In some ways, you could have predicted the possibility of a pandemic, but we still, have a lot of things in the world that are truly unknowable. So now for the practical part. So this is what the bottom line is, and we'll get into how to do that. And but the interesting thing here is when I go around the world and try to teach this stuff, whether I'm teaching entrepreneurs or educators or policymakers, a lot of people are excited about entrepreneurship, right? Everybody, prime minister on down, I think, will say, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur too, right? Entrepreneur is seen as this good thing. But most novices, people who are just starting out, struggle with four, kinds of objections to this. So they will say, I want to be an entrepreneur, but, and they'll say, I don't have an idea. Usually what they mean by that is, I don't have a brilliant, new to the world, innovative idea, is what they mean. All of us have ideas. But what they mean when they say, I don't have an idea, is that they have this assumption that to start a great company, you have to have a brilliant idea to begin with, and I don't have that. Then people will say, okay, for some reason, this is not even clicking. Come on. Okay. I don't have money. Or sometimes it is, I don't have money, I don't have other resources, I don't have time. So there are multiple resources that people will say I don't have. I don't have internet access. That used to be one of those things in the early days, but not anymore. And of course, a lot of people will say, I would like to be an entrepreneur. I even think I can raise a little bit of money. I have an idea, but I am really afraid to fail. It seems very risky to me. So I don't want it. And then, of course, a lot of people will say, yeah, I know everybody talks about this entrepreneurship thing, but I don't really know. What do entrepreneurs do? Like, how do I get started? So these are the four kinds of questions. No matter where I go, I get these questions. And so Effectuation is going to try and answer these questions in a condition of true uncertainty. So when you think about it, where does Effectuation come from? Let's take a look at that. It comes from lessons learned by expert entrepreneurs. How do I know that? Because for my dissertation, I actually defined what an expert entrepreneur is. Somebody who has started and has been running companies for 15 years or longer, multiple ventures, including successes and failures. So these are people who have lived through many successes and many failures, and yet they have also performed, way above average. They've taken at least one company public. So this was the definition of the expert entrepreneur. And I used methods from cognitive science where people had studied 200 different domains of expertise, but they had not studied entrepreneurs. So I used methods from that called Think Aloud Protocol. And only 245 people actually qualified as an expert entrepreneur. I wrote to all of them, and 45 people participated in the study. And the study is not just an interview. There's a whole bunch of like an experimental exercise that they had to go through for over two hours. And that's where the research, the idea of effectuation comes from. So that is just a quick look at the research. And then over the last 20 years, this has become increasingly adopted in schools to teach, but also there is way more research on it. There are over 100 top-tier journal articles published related to effectuation. My colleagues and I have written about 200 case studies, and there are 1,000 educators, more than that, who are not only teaching, but also creating teaching materials. And when I put this 100 top-tier journal articles, but if you take all the publications, it's pretty close to 1,000 publications out there, and many of which I myself haven't read and kept up with. But that is how you know an idea has legs, right? If it takes off on its own, which is what is happening. We try to kind of make it all available through www.effectuation.org. For those of you who are interested in learning more about it, you can go there. All right. So this is where the research comes from. So now let's actually look at what are the findings. There are 5 principles of acting under extreme uncertainty, or what I call fundamental uncertainty. And each of these principles sort of invert what we teach in management schools. Not that what we teach in management schools is wrong. In fact, it's very, very useful if you get to go to a business school, whether for undergraduate or graduate, because all of those things are important, but almost all of them rely on prediction as a way of tackling uncertainty. Whereas what the expert entrepreneurs learn is to completely remove prediction from it, but still deal with uncertainty. And so that's the interesting part. Like, how do you deal with a fundamentally unpredictable future without using prediction? How do you control a future that you cannot predict? And these 5 principles are a kind of a logic of how to do that. I'm going to walk you through the 5 principles and give a couple of examples, and then come back to this issue of what is actually going on here. Okay. So the first thing is, everybody always thinks that you have to start your life, any project that you want to win at, you have to start with a clear goal, and then you have to go for it, and you have to be a visionary, you have to be persistent. Whereas these expert entrepreneurs were doing almost the opposite of that. They were actually saying, yeah, I would like to do this, I do have some goals, but all of that is not as important as what do I actually have in hand? What is my bird in hand? Who am I? What do I know? Like, whom do I know? And so I start with what is already within my hand, what is already within my control. And then I ask myself, what can I do with that? So interestingly, they're not starting with a goal and looking for means to achieve the goal. They're actually starting with means and asking, what kinds of goals can I achieve? So that is the bird in hand principle. The second principle is the affordable loss principle. So again, when you take finance courses, what we learn in finance courses is, let's project, future cash flows, future returns, future risks, and then we calculate risk-adjusted return, right? And then we take the net present value, we bring it back to the present, right? So we project future cash flows and calculate the net present value of those cash flows. And then we want to invest in the ones that have positive cash flows, and higher the cash flow, the better, right? So higher than NPV of the cash flow, the better. Again, the entrepreneurs are not going to try and predict the future. They've already decided that, right? So they don't particularly believe in expected return. Instead, they ask, what is my affordable loss? What am I willing and able to lose to work on this venture, right? So So if you look at people who have started companies, especially people like you all who have other opportunities, right? You have job opportunities. You are not necessity entrepreneurs. So some of my students are definitely, they have opportunity costs, right? So people will say, yeah, how do you make a decision to leave like a $200,000 job to start a company? And then if you try to project the future cash flows and take the net present value, it gets really impossible because the future cash flows could be zero in entrepreneurship. And right there, that calculation stops, right? So instead, I asked them to talk to alumni. The alumni who have actually made these decisions, how do they make the decision? They say, you know what, I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And if I don't do it now, when will I ever do it? I've always wanted to be my own boss. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 6 months of nights and weekends, and I got a couple of bucks saved up. It could be $20,000, $50,000, and I'm willing to put that in. If it works out, I'll put something more in. If it works out, if it doesn't work out, no problem. I have a day job. I'm not going to leave my day job. Some other people will say, you know what, I'm willing to kind of leave my job, take a year off to try this out. And then if it doesn't work, what is the worst case scenario? I'll be back on the job market. Maybe I'll not have a $200,000 job. Maybe I'll have a $150,000 job. You know, so be it, because I've always wanted to try it out. At least I don't want to have the regret. This is what Jeff Bezos said, right? Regret minimization is how you make the plunge decision, and not really that you're going to make millions and you're going to change the world in some ways. So affordable loss basically says, what am I willing to lose? What can I lose? And it's also a way to keep the downside within your control. So now you start with who you are, what you know, and whom you know, and you start asking yourself, what do I want to do for affordable loss? No more than affordable loss, but it also makes you think about your projects differently. Do I want to do this? Because even if I lose it, do I want to do it? And so that's a different way to assess projects in some way. So they use bird in hand and affordable loss. And then what they do is they start talking to other people, right? They're trying to stitch together what I call this crazy quilt. This is a zari quilt from Gujarat, actually. So they start stitching together. What do I mean by that? If you're not 100% clear what you're doing and you're willing to lose only a certain amount, you're only going to invest what you're willing to lose, then you can't just go and get the convince people this is the greatest idea in the world and you should put $7 million in my company. You cannot do that kind of pitching. Instead, you start working with whoever wants to work with you, even though those people are just bringing their bird in hand and their affordable loss. And you start stitching together this crazy quilt of partnerships of people who come on board to work with you. And that is how you start bringing stakeholders on board. You're not targeting some high worth stakeholders. You can do that too, but the idea really is to work with whoever wants to work with you. So that is the crazy quilt principle. But of course, if you build ventures in this way, all kinds of things, unexpected things are going to hit you. In fact, if you build it in the predictive, planned way, still unexpected things are going to hit you. So life throws lemons at you. So you also have to learn how to make lemonade, how to transform these negative surprises into some kind of positive opportunities. And the most important and the most difficult for people to understand is the idea of pilot in the plane. The pilot in the plane idea is the idea that the future is not out there. It's not like a landscape that you are going to penetrate or a mountain that you're going to climb or even an ocean. It's truly, the future is something, it's like a mass of clay at this point, and you and I can co-create this future, right? And every single person on this plane is actually a co-pilot. So the idea here is you can decide. The history doesn't run on autopilot. What people do matters. The future comes from what people do, not from any inevitable trends that are out there. So now let's look at, I want to give you examples of 3 companies from India, just the stories. And then I will take it to the next level and give you like the dynamic model. So the first story I want to tell you is Husk Power. Many of you might already know this. Husk power is basically creating electrical power from rice husk in Bihar. And thousands of villages in Bihar now are getting power from husk power. They've also moved into solar, and their model is now being imitated in other countries. They themselves are in Tanzania, but I know people in Haiti who are trying to do this. So if you go back to the beginning of how they started, and I'm very happy and proud that two of the co-founders are from Darden. And there were two co-founders who are already in India as well, who got started. So if you go into a village in Bihar, especially villages that don't have any electricity, how do you build a power plant, a biomass power plant, right? And so it seems like, I'm sure many of you will already know this. Immediately people will tell you this is crazy, Bihar is a difficult place, biomass machinery is expensive, you have to worry about political issues, corruption, Maoist rebels who will kidnap your engineers. You hear all kinds of things. And then you say, oh, when after you put the whole thing, you create the power grid, nobody will pay you because they will not steal the electricity anyway. So unless you're government or some big company or something, you cannot do it. So that's that's kind of the feedback they get. So what they did was very interesting because they didn't try to do it that way, right? They basically went into villages and tried to build a power plant that with stuff that's already in the village, right? With burden, whatever is available there. It just happened that the founder was an engineer who knew a thing or two about converting biomass. And the raw material, of course, is rice husk, which nobody is using. They just collect them on the side of the road. It emits methane. It's bad for the environment. They decided to take that waste and they said, let's build a plant. And the original plant they built was just a tiny thing that could power like 20 houses. And the inspiration for them there was actually, what is it that these people want to use electricity for? Sure, people want to use electricity for light and other basic things, but people really wanted to use electricity also for charging the mobile phones. At least with lights and things, you can get kerosene lamps or you have other alternatives. How do you charge your mobile phone without electricity? And why are mobile phones so important? Because if you have mobile phone, you can generate or increase your income a little bit more. And not to mention things like entertainment and other things. And so they took the idea from mobile phones as how do mobile phone companies get paid in remote villages? Basically by prepaid phone cards, right? That is how they get paid. So they decided to make like prepaid electricity. So they didn't create a gigantic grid. They invented the concept of a micro grid that will power only like 20 houses. And their big innovation was this meter that they created. So there will be somebody who knocks on your door and asks how much electricity do you want this month? And then you tell them, I don't know, 2 lights, 1 fan and 2 mobile phones. And then they will like crank up the meter and everything goes. And then it runs down over time. And when it's run down, you have to pay again. The person shows up. And so it was kind of this really cool, really interesting way. And then you start thinking about how do you scale it? And of course, the interesting thing is a lot of the mobile phone companies got excited about this, right? That everywhere husk power went, mobile phone use also increases. But more importantly, think about how they're building it, right? They're using local resources, but they're also training local people to do a lot of these jobs, to build the plant, to maintain it, to do the accounting, to knock on the door, to operate the meter. At the same time, each person is only investing what they can afford to lose in some ways. So it's not this huge multi-million-dollar. In fact, in the early stages, I remember being on a conference call with the founders because the 2 students in Darden were out there writing business plans about husk power. And just in the business plan competition, they were beginning to get 5,000 here, 15,000 there, 25,000. And then I remember Shell coming in and they wanted to give them a grant for, I don't know, like a $250,000 or something like that. And the co-founder at Bihar was literally using Bihari Hindi, which I don't want to use here, basically saying, what the heck are you guys doing there? What are we going to do with all this money? Stop raising this money. It was very interesting, that conversation. Of course, they tried to talk to each other about the money aspect, and there were lots of there are lots of soap opera difficulties, everything that happened in building a company. So anyway, so that is a story of Husk Power that talks about bird in hand and affordable loss, but there's also a lot of crazy quilt and lemonade and things like that involved, because you have so many people that you have to bring on board, and each one is different. Now let's do a very different kind of company. I'm sure you've also heard of Biocon. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw built Biocon. And if you know the story of Biocon, and BBC has a couple of lovely mini documentaries and interviews with her, and she herself has given other interviews. Her story, she calls herself an accidental entrepreneur, right? She never thought she was going to be an entrepreneur. She didn't set out to be an entrepreneur. She actually wanted to become a Braumeister, right? Somebody who was like the top honcho in a beer company. And that's what she trained for. She was very good at. But it turned out that it's not that easy to be a Braumeister in India, and that too a female one was, so she hit the glass ceiling. She was a little down a little bit. She goes to Scotland, and somebody introduces her to this guy, Auchinloss, who says, hey, I am looking to make some biopharmaceuticals. Everybody tells me I should go to Asia. I don't know anybody in Asia. You're the only person who has been introduced in some way. Like, would you like to build? And she's like, I'm not a chemist. What are you asking me? But then she thinks a little bit, and he also talks to her some more, and they realize that she does know a thing or two, right? As a Braumeister, she knows enzymes, right? Beers. And so initially they said, okay, you know how to make enzymes. Start with enzymes. And then now it's it's a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company in biopharmaceutical. And she learns, I'm going quickly here, but the idea is you don't even have to know that you want to start a company, right? That's a crazy quilt idea, that you meet someone and something happens, and it turns out that life had thrown lemons at you, right? Your dream career is not working out. And then you end up building like this amazing company in an industry that you had to learn everything the hard way. There's much more to Kiran Mazumdar's story that you can look up, but I just wanted you to see how these principles are in action in some of these companies. And the last one I want to touch on, this one I have to declare ahead of time that I was involved with the founders from the beginning of this organization as well, but I also served as their advisor, and I'm on the board. So make of it what you will. So this is an accelerator exclusively focused on SaaS companies in Bangalore, started by Prasanna Krishnamurthy, and it's called Upekha. And Prasanna was already he was running Microsoft Corporate Ventures, and he came across Effectuation, and we started talking together, and he wanted to build a different kind of an accelerator. You should really look it up. But the whole idea behind this is that instead of being driven by money, this accelerator would be driven by peer investments in each other, both in financial and non-financial resources. And Upekha has developed a whole methodology, partly based on Effectuation, partly based on other things, because Prasanna is very good at bringing many ideas together. And they built a methodology which is truly this co-creation, pilot in the plane kind of methodology. So you can look it up. So these are 3 companies. Each of them, I think, embodies these Effectuation principles in very different ways in very different industries. So I thought I'll tell you those stories. So the next thing I'm going to do is to just take all of this and deepen our understanding from the practical to just see it over time. How does time play into it? So let's look at the Effectual process model. And now we are slowly going to transition into a little bit more of a research mode here as well. So, we're going to take the same principles, but now you kind of see them in action here, right? So you start with who am I, what do I know, and whom do I know? And you come up with some ideas that you can do for affordable loss. And most of these ideas are likely to be mundane, nothing fantastically new or anything like that. Mundane ideas, things that you can already do within your control, right? So this is what I tell my students, this is day one, right? You can do this in day one. Day two, you start interacting with other people. And when you start interacting with other people, what are you doing? A lot of people think I'm going to take advice, I'm going to build a prototype, I'm going to get like all this user interviews, and I'm going to get feedback, and I'm going to get all this information, and then I'm going to figure out, I'm going to go from this mundane idea to this brilliant idea, right? Wrong. What the expert entrepreneurs are doing when they're interacting with every interaction, even if they're just strangers that you meet on a train or on a plane or something, every interaction, you're actually trying to get them to commit something, put some skin in the game on your venture, right? Whoever you're talking to, you're trying to get them, what is it going to take for you to come on board and work with me for nothing, right? The idea is, how will you invest for nothing? Will you buy this for nothing? The idea really is to try to bring people on board, get them to make commitments, even though their commitments can be just affordable loss commitments for them, right? So your aim is to get to a commitment. But every time you get to a commitment, what happens? You start getting some new means. So you set in motion this expanding cycle of co-created resources. The company becomes who we are, what we know, whom we know, right? Rather than who I am. So that's expanding. Our affordable loss is expanding. But also the goals are changing. What this venture is going to be, what the business model is going to look like. We might end up in completely different things too. So there is an openness to the goals that come in, because that's the price you pay, right? When people want to come work with you, they want to be able to shape the venture as well. And you have to give room for that. And these new goals start setting in motion a converging cycle of co-created constraints. And along the way, of course, there will be completely like surprises from outside that hit both the bird in hand and the affordable loss. And you learn how to use those surprises. But the process itself takes you not just to new ventures, but very often to completely new market categories, new opportunities. So if you look at this, one of the things you can see in terms of performance implications is, it's not about the probability of succeeding or failing. This says, if you succeed, you're more likely to end up with something really innovative. And so the magnitude of success is likely to be higher. If you fail, no one in the process loses more than they can afford to lose. So the costs of failure are going to be lower, which means you can build multiple ventures, especially since you also have relationships. So the idea here is, this is why the expert entrepreneurs are learning this lesson, because this allows you to outlive a lot of small failures and accumulate a lot of small successes and wonderful relationships over time into something totally innovative that nobody in the process might have predicted ahead of time. So I would like to stop here for a moment, and then after we have a little bit of a conversation and Q&A, we can come back and I can show you a few video clips where you directly hear from the entrepreneurs, not just from me. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing